Hi, Siva.
How you doing, Will? It's good to be here. Or wherever.
Well, it's great to have you on. This is, in fact, the second time we've done this, but our first attempt was an abject failure and died due to technical difficulties. When was that?
That's the thing. Several months ago. But I teach and write about technology, so you shouldn't necessarily expect me to be able to operate things properly. That may be asking too much of me.
Well, yeah. There are those who can do and those who teach.
Right. Exactly.
Well, Siva, introduce yourself more fully, partly because I don't want to hazard mangling your last name. And tell us a little bit about what you do and where you come from.
Well, my name is Siva Vaidhyanathan. I'm an associate professor of media studies and law at the University of Virginia, which actually viewers can see, viewers can see on my chest. I'm wearing a Virginia t-shirt today. I'm going totally casual Thursdays.
Wahoo!
Right, exactly. And I'm writing a book about Google right now. It's called The Googlization of Everything. And I'm trying to write it as openly as possible. So my note-taking process and sort of running ideas by people is occurring on a blog called The Googlization of Everything. And I'm soliciting a tremendous number of helpful comments and feedback and criticisms and insults. It's a terrifying way to write a book. This is my third book that I've written, and I've edited one other one. My first book was A Cultural History of American Copyright, and it was called Copyrights and Copywrongs. Came out in 2001, and then my second book was called The Anarchist in the Library, which was sort of a big picture look at information politics in a global sense and how the internet was altering our expectations about flows of information and how that might affect cultural production, how that might affect cultural consumption, how that might affect political movements. And all of that came down in the sort of shadow of Napster. I saw that sort of peer-to-peer movement as being fairly important in the history of communication. I was probably wrong about that, but it was a fun book to write, and that came out in 2004.
So, your background academically is in American Studies, is that right?
Yeah. I through the 90s, I was training myself to be a 19th century cultural historian and someone who paid a lot of attention to people like William James and Mark Twain, only to find myself sort of, sucked a century into the future from that moment. And, because I was writing about copyright, I was writing about a variety of sort of cultural and intellectual phenomena that were really important in the 1890s that all of a sudden became even more important in the 1990s. And as the internet sort of brought a lot of issues to the forefront, especially copyright issues, I found myself sort of on call. A lot of people were very interested by the late 90s in how copyright was affecting culture and vice versa, especially in a digital context. So I had to sort of retrain myself to sort of master the digital moment, and that was again a lot of fun, but it was sort of terrifying. And so unfortunately, I don't do archival research on Mark Twain anymore, which was a lot of fun. Instead, I tend to sit in chairs like this. Yeah, it's just amazing when you can spend your time with characters who plug so centrally into important issues and important phenomena in our country's history or the world's history, and he was certainly central to that. But the world swept me up into this 21st century set of concerns, and so now I often feel like I missed out on the musty archive. But that's the way it goes.
There's always trade-offs. They're always tragic.
Right.
This is my semi-economist view of life.
Well, then that's
trade-offs everywhere. But
exactly.
Unlike economists, I never think that what you have compensates for what you lost.
Well, there's one bit of wisdom that I wish economists would sort of pithily remind everybody of every day, which is, there's rarely a zero sum in almost any change in the world. So it's all a matter of somebody else benefiting. It's not like nobody benefits. So take for one example, when Napster had sort of come upon us, and everyone was freaking out about the future of the music industry, and everybody was screaming about music being free, free, free. At no point did we sort of entertain the conversation that included the fact that a number of very important firms were making a tremendous amount of money off of this new technology. It wasn't that the interaction with the medium was actually cost-free. We all started buying bigger hard drives, which were often made by Sony anyway. We all started buying, early MP3 players and ultimately iPods, and we all started hooking up to broadband, which was often owned by Time Warner, another company suing Napster. So, it's not like the winner-loser math was quite so simple. And that's the sort of thing that it's not to say that the legal case would have gone any other way, but when discussing these things, it's always important to remember that somebody's winning in there. It's nothing is completely free. It's just a matter of how we divvy up the resources.
So tell me, how do you think? What would Mark Twain think about Google?
Oh my God, that's a great question. I actually hadn't thought about that, but now you're forcing me to think about it.
Yeah, it just occurred to me. I was like, what would he say about it? He would say something funny, mordant, but.
Well, Mark Twain was interested in things in some very complicated ways. So, for one thing, he was dazzled by technology. He was dazzled by gadgets.
Yeah.
One of his favorite people in the world was Edison, and there are a lot of ways in which Hank Morgan in Connecticut Yankee is modeled on Edison in the sense that a lot of his personality traits, his technological optimism, is embodied in Hank Morgan. So and Twain had a lot of this himself. He was the first major American author to issue a typescript. He typed out Adventures of Huckleberry Finn before it was published. No one else had done that. He also invested quite a bit of money in.
That's a big deal, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and he invested money in new printing technologies and lost a lot of money in new printing technologies. He was one of the first Americans to have a telephone before it was actually a useful and valuable thing. Telephones are only useful.
I didn't realize he was such an early adopter.
Yeah, when he lived in Hartford, he lived kind of next door to Harriet Beecher Stowe, and in a very elite neighborhood, and a lot of his friends all started hooking up with telephones at the time. Connecticut was one of the first places that actually had telephone service. So in one sense, he was fascinated by technology. On the other hand, he also had a deep sense of foreboding about technology. And you can read that in Connecticut Yankee as well. And so I think he would look at Google in two ways. He would say he would laugh or make fun of the Whiggishness embodied in the sort of engineering ideology. The fact that the idea that we can,
even though he had a little bit of that himself,
exactly right, and that's why he's every interesting author has complicated thoughts about things. So he would have thought he would have been immersed in Google and fascinated by it and loved it most hours of the day, but then he probably would have written his satirical screeds about how it's going to ruin our minds or eliminate our ability to actually remember things. By the end of his life, especially, he had lost almost all faith in progress. He had lost almost all faith in our species and its ability to actually work and think its way out of problems. He was so depressed by the Spanish-American War and by American imperialism. He was so depressed by what he saw as sort of gathering clouds in Europe as sort of pre-World War I Europe was so obviously corrupt and the old royal order was degraded. So the last few things he wrote were really depressing, almost Nietzschean in their tone.
What are the last couple things? Now I want to read those because I have a taste for. I'm about the most Whiggish person in the world.
Yeah.
When it comes to like this sense of the inevitability of progress, but for some reason I have this incredible taste for people who are like everything is going to end now.
Yeah, there's this great book called What is Man, which was it was the last book-length thing he wrote.
Twain?
Yeah, by Twain, and it's written almost like a Socratic dialogue, so it's not his most fun read by any means, but it is a grumpy old man who's read a lot and seen a lot, looking at his species, saying, we're kind of screwed. And you can actually, there's no evidence that he knew who Nietzsche was or he had ever read Nietzsche, but there's a whole lot of sort of thematic coherence. In the last decade of his life, he did spend some time in Germany and Austria, but I've never seen evidence that he actually owned any of Nietzsche's work or was.
When did Twain die?
1910. Yeah.
1910.
Yeah.
So because when I think of my favorite American prose writers, Twain is one, and Mencken is another. And Mencken actually wrote a book about Nietzsche.
Well, that's the thing. Mencken was like,
he was like the next generation.
He was, yeah. And so Mencken, I think, Mencken started his career around 1912. His journalistic career as a very young man around 1912. So
so they're like two generations apart.
Yeah, but Mencken was clearly influenced by Twain in terms of his satirical voice, in terms of his moodiness about the potential of progress. And we think of Mencken as being a deeply conservative person. We don't necessarily use that term to describe Twain, and that's largely because Twain didn't fit our 20th century or 21st century notion of conservative and liberal as most 19th century people didn't. But Twain had his...
I certainly don't read Mencken as a conservative. As a guy who people identify as libertarian, he's got a very libertarian-ish voice where he's constantly deriding conservative people. He's like, he hates religious people with a passion. So if you're mocking religion and sort of like stout-hearted patriotic Americans in 1912 or 1920 something,
that's why Mencken, like Twain, is sui generis. It's almost not worth trying to play the taxonomy game with either of them, because Mencken just made fun of anybody who sincerely believed anything, who believed in anything, and that was that's like a hardcore version of American skepticism and pragmatism with direct influence from people like Nietzsche. Mencken was the first American sort of translator of Nietzsche, not in a literal sense, but in a sense that he was the first person who brought Nietzschean views and thoughts into American conversations.
I think he actually did do a translation, being a native German speaker.
Yeah, he might have.
Yeah.
So
with that, we got a little bit sidetracked there. So you're talking about Mark Twain, but that's pretty interesting. And
you brought me back. You brought me back to my roots. I loved it.
Sorry?
Yeah, you brought me back to my intellectual roots, and so I really appreciate that. I didn't have to talk about anything high tech for like 10 minutes, and that's so refreshing.
Well, that's nice. Well, I'll tell you what. Like after this dialogue, I'm going to go Google what is man.
All right, very good.
And find it, and I will use Google. But let's talk about Google. So you're working on this book, the Googlization of everything. Just give me the elevator speech. What's it about?
Yeah, well, in the big picture, it's about how we have so quickly adopted this lens through which we view the world. We've selected one company's interface as our launching point for investigation. When we have a question about a big idea, when we wonder the best place to buy size 14 shoes, when we try to figure out the best way to kill the mosquitoes that are growing in my yard for some reason. It's a pretty stunning thing to think that in 10 short years we have invited this company into our lives in the most significant and intimate ways. And that raises all sorts of questions because, for one thing, thank goodness it's here, right? Thank goodness that somebody figured out a decent way to make sense to navigate the World Wide Web, which is this teeming, growing, flashing set of documents. At the same time, I think it raises some significant concerns. What exactly is the nature of the transaction? Why is Google doing all this for us? When was the last time you wrote a check to Google? I've never written a check to Google, but I use it as much
Google
as,
writes checks to me.
Right, I use it as much as I use my satellite television service or my mobile phone. And yet I write checks for those. Why don't I write checks for Google? So what is the transaction? Well, of course, what it really comes down to, and one of the key insights I think here is that we are not actually Google's customers. We are actually Google's product. Not in the sort of Soylent Green as people kind of way, but in the way that
Google is made of people.
Yeah, exactly. No. So, but in the way that we are, we have to recognize that Google needs to keep us just happy enough that we voluntarily sign up to be Google's customers and remain Google's customers. Now, that's not an insignificant thing. So Google does care very much that it keeps us happy. But it also means that when it comes to some really hard questions, Google doesn't have to answer to us primarily. Those hard questions involve, for instance, the retention of personal data, where we can start all the Facebook groups in the world and all the petitions in the world, and Google doesn't have to do what we say or what we demand. Secondly, when it comes to how Google relates to the government of the People's Republic of China, its concern is how to satisfy advertisers and get more advertisers, because advertisers are Google's customers. And its concern is not at all what we might think of the company. Once we recognize that, then we open up a whole lot of other interesting questions. So it's a cynical view of the role that Google plays in our lives, but it's an examination. The book is an examination of just the incredible ways that we've moved this company front and center in our lives. And so I'm sort of dazzled by it and scared by it.
I want to talk a little bit more about the way in which Google is and isn't like other things. So when if I'm the old school television where I'm just getting the signal out of the air,
right?
And there are the big three channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS. I wasn't the customer, right? The advertisers were the customer. They were giving it away.
Right. Similar relationship.
So the old model of actual television broadcast was a lot like a lot of the sort of advertising based business models on the internet that Google best exemplifies, where you just have to keep people tuning in so that you can sell advertisements.
Yeah, but the ad relationship is so much more sophisticated through Google, and that's one of the things that's really interesting about this. Google is not...
So what does Google know about me that CBS didn't?
Oh, almost everything, whereas CBS knew almost nothing about you. CBS knew you as a member of an aggregate. CBS knew that you lived in a particular... Well, actually didn't know anything about you, but knew that the people of your city or of your state were interested in buying this soap versus that soap. But that's about all CBS really knew. What CBS knew most importantly was the big aggregate numbers, like how many people are watching The Price is Right, how many people are watching, Walter Cronkite. So those were the only important pieces of data that CBS would then take into the ad marketplace. And as a result, the ads that appear on CBS to this day are Procter & Gamble and Budweiser and Chevrolet, the very few companies that have reason to think they can sell something to 90% of Americans. Whereas Google has mastered the small ball game, right? Google has figured out that getting a handful of dollars from Joe's shoe store and doing that, replicating that transaction 1 million times is so much better than getting a $5 million check from Procter & Gamble. Largely because the potential for growth is so much better, and largely because nobody else was serving that shoe store efficiently. That shoe store could buy an ad in a local newspaper. And this is actually one of the most important relationships between Google and newspapers. It has nothing to do with Google News. It has to do with the fact that Joe's Shoe Store no longer needs to spend that that amount of money on an ad that might or might not work in in a measurable way in the local newspaper. Instead, it's interested in hooking up with Google, where the results are measurable. So all of a sudden, the advertising industry is dealing with something it has never had to deal with in 100 years, which is actual accountability. And we're finding out that advertising wasn't actually that effective, and that very targeted ads are effective. To target the ads properly, Google has to know a lot about you, has to know exactly where you live, has to be able to estimate your income, has to be able to figure out the other products that have interested you, the hobbies that interest you, the sorts of keywords that are in your head at any given time. And so Google has an interest in tracking a lot of that.
Yeah, I'm a sort of obsessive Google user. Not obsessive, I just use it. And this is part of your point. People just use Google. There are alternatives, but they're minor in terms of their market share when it comes to search. But also, I use all these other Google products as well. So I use Gmail. I use Google Docs for sort of writing online documents. I keep some of my spreadsheets on Google's servers. Despite the fact that nobody but Brazilians seem to use it, I have an Orchid profile, and so probably you could create a Will Wilkinson AI using just Google's data on me. It's got my credit card number. It knows exactly where I live. It has all the correspondence that I've had over the last 4 years, maybe. Like everything that I've said to everybody, including sort of, love letters and G-chats that would be, extremely embarrassing if people were to read them. So there is this, what is to keep somebody from taking all this information? How secure? And this is a question I've asked before. I think I had what's his name? Aaron Swartz? Is that his name?
Right.
The guy who started Reddit. And that was a question that came up that really interests me. Like, what kind of access does a Google employee have to databases that have consumer information in it? Because that's an interesting privacy question. Because I've often been concerned.
Yeah. For
instance, Carrie Howley, my partner, she's written about the abuse of government databases, where there will be abused women who are trying to run away from their husbands. For instance.
So there are two answers to that. Well, there are actually three answers.
This guy will have a friend at the DMV who hacks into it to find her current address.
Right.
So her abusive husband can track her down.
There are three answers to this, and approaching all those concerns. First of all, we have no reason to believe that the company itself abuses any of this access. But remember how I phrased that. We have no reason to believe, right? We have no evidence that Google as a company or anyone at Google has inordinate or improper access to your information. But there's a whole lot of trust built into that, right?
There is.
We're comfortable with Google because Google's given us no reason to be uncomfortable. But that's largely because we don't think much about it. Google's interface is so pleasant and unthreatening, and there's nothing about Google itself that ever makes us uneasy. Right? In terms of just the day-to-day interaction with it. Which is why someone like you who actually thinks through this stuff is still perfectly willing to become a Google Power user, right? Or Prime user. So one important thing here is because you use Gmail and Google Docs, you actually register with Google every time you use it. And so Google has a fairly sophisticated dossier on you. But Google doesn't actually care about the email you wrote to your mom or about the bad poetry that you've written on Google Docs, right? We can sort of dial down our concerns about Google itself by remembering that most of what most of us do is pretty useless and worthless in a market sense or in a spying sense, right? So while, yes, I guess it's theoretically possible.
But suppose... Yeah. Well, that's the question. So it's theoretical. So, and I just don't know how the technology works, right? I imagine that there's some sense in which all this data that's associated with my account it's because it's associated with my account. It's got some sort of like a number in it that's my number or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that all this information, simply by having my login and password, all this information would be available to someone. Let me
tell you what's important. Right. What's important to Google is your trends and your habits. So Google cares generally about where you sit when you use Google, and that indicates to Google your sort of local commercial potential, and that helps them target ads. When you read Gmail often has ads that reflect the keywords that Google's computers read from your email. So if you've written 3 or 4 emails to people about chess, you're going to start to see chess ads show up in your Gmail because it's catching those keywords. Now, no human being.
Well, one of my favorite things with the contextual ads is every now and then I'll be exchanging emails with somebody who's the author of a book, and it will actually give me an ad for the book by the guy that I'm corresponding with. That's just really cool. Like that.
I mean, if only more things in life were that way. Where you were, if I walked around the world, I was at the supermarket, and all of a sudden the checkout person sees an ad for my book. It would be lovely. But no, but let me go to your second concern, which is Google does have in its databases a whole lot of things about Will, right? So it has. If someone were to actually look into its servers, people could actually figure out what books you actually care about, maybe what books you've purchased. It would care about the web searches you've done, right? So imagine, for instance, that you were a person of interest to the FBI. And imagine for a second that the FBI decided to show up in Mountain View, California with a national security letter, which, as we know, does not actually require judicial review and is essentially a self-denying technology. Google's not allowed to tell you that the FBI showed up with a national security letter. This is a real risk, and something that Google has not taken seriously enough. Or actually, most web commerce sites have not taken this seriously. I don't think Amazon's taken it seriously enough, for instance, where the FBI can, and we haven't obviously taken it seriously, the FBI can find out a whole lot about us with no judicial oversight and no real ability to appeal. It's also important to remember that Google is one part of a much larger infrastructure of data management. ChoicePoint being, I think, the best example of a company that assembles consumer data based on credit card purchases, based on supermarket discount cards, and your Barnes and Noble card, right? So ChoicePoint knows a whole lot about you too, maybe even more or more important stuff than Google does. The government and governments at all levels buy ChoicePoint profiles, just like MasterCard and Visa do, just like LL Bean does. And because they can be customers just like any company in America. So a lot of what in other words, the government is assembling some pretty sophisticated databases about all of us and doing these cross analyses to find out if you've been to Cairo and Damascus and Manila in a 6-month period. They're going to start asking certain questions and cross checking that with your known associates, and your known associates might be discoverable through your Gmail address book. And so you might, if they see from ChoicePoint that you've flown to these places, they might go to Google and say, well, we know he uses Gmail. We want his Gmail address book or his Gmail records. Here's a national security letter, and you would never know about it. So that's a big problem.
So that's the thing that concerns me. See, that they and this is one of those issues where I've never decided what I think exactly, because when I hear sort of extreme pro-privacy people talk, they always want me to do all of these things that just bum me out, that are too onerous. I'm not going to start encrypting all my emails. I'm not going to. It's just I'm not going to not use Google. I'm not going to. So. I'm not going to deny. I'm not going to not use my or put false information on my supermarket discount card or whatever, right? Because I actually like it that the supermarket knows what coupons they ought to give me on the receipt, and I like it that that Google gives me ads that are useful to me. That one of the things that I like about Google's advertisement is that it actually shows. I mean, there's this long-standing argument about the nature of advertisement, whether the point of it is to induce desire or whether it's to serve an informational function, letting people know that goods and services that they might be interested in are available. The kind of advertising that Google does isn't about inducing desire. It's not flashy enough. You need sort of like rich media to do that. It's like a little box that has a little bit of text that says, here's this place where you can buy shoes at a discount.
Well, the web itself induces desire.
And the reason it gives it to me is because it thinks I'm interested.
Right. So the web itself channels desire, right? The web itself either induces desire or channels desire. And some of them are pretty nasty desires, right? So Google is in a wonderful position. It never has to pay to generate a desire for you. You're showing up in front of your computer with your desires. And then you're sitting there and basically telling Google, here's what moves me. And Google's sitting back there going, this is the brilliance of this company, right? Google's sitting back there going,
let me help.
Yeah, well, not only that. So not only do they say, I'm gonna give you a subtle ad that reflects your desires, which you've already expressed to me, and someone else paid to generate, right? But then when it comes to basic content, it never has to pay. Google never has to pay a writer, never has to pay a photographer or a videographer, because we so gladly give it up, right? We spend hours and hours of our time hacking together YouTube videos. Some of them are brilliant and some of them are dumb, but it doesn't matter. And then we just give it to Google and say, make money from our work here, And that's a really brilliant insight, right? So you've got all the pornographers in the world basically giving content to Google. You've got all the commerce companies in the world giving money to Google, essentially by saying, here are the things people desire, go ahead and sell ads around it, right? You've got all of the journalistic institutions in the world paying people to go out and write stories and produce video, and then essentially giving it to Google, because Google becomes that starting point in the web. To get anywhere, you have to go through a thicket of Google ads. You don't have to, but people choose to, right? I mean, what a brilliant thing, right? They never have to write a check for anything, for any labor beyond coding, and lawyers, to get this setup. One of the things I'm trying to figure out is whether that insight was accidental, whether they just sort of stumbled upon it one day and went, yo, what we got here is this amazing situation where everybody else in the world is going to choose to go through our gateway, and we're going to take a nickel at a time. We're going to be the toll booth, and no one's even going to notice. I mean, what a brilliant thing. Yeah, it's pretty stunning.
Yeah, they just seem to have had that insight first, and having had it first,
right.
got a big advantage. Let's talk more about some of the worries that you have. So one of in your sort of breakdown of what you intend to cover in your book, and this gets to the issue of Google being the filter through which people get to the rest of the web. So one of your issues is the phenomenology of Google. How does Google structure our perception of the information on the internet? Because that information is just out there, and it exists in no real pattern. It's just out there in the pattern that it's in. The reason that Google search is useful, or YouTube search is useful, or whatever, is that it structures and aggregates information for us according to a complicated rule. But then that complicated rule becomes the lens through which we see all this information. Do you think that that's can be limiting in a way that people don't quite grasp?
Well, and that's actually my point. And to bridge these two concerns, the Googlization of us, meaning the privacy issue, right? And the Googlization of knowledge. The Googlization of knowledge, meaning the way that Google structures our experience of searching for information. The key to dealing with both of these phenomena is transparency. I would like to know better. I think we should all know better and understand better what is at stake in terms of our private information with Google, but also we should also understand better how Google structures the internet for us. Now, we know some general parameters. We know the core principle of Google's PageRank algorithm is that pages are privileged when a lot of other pages link to said page. And they're privileged even more when those pages that are doing the linking happen to be highly rated pages. So if you have a blog and I have a blog, and you have about 500 incoming links to a post, and I have about 500 incoming links to a post, if you happen to have an incoming link from Boing Boing or an incoming link from WashingtonPost.com, you are going to be more highly ranked than I will, right? Let's assume we're writing about the same subject, right? We're both writing about college football, right? Or something, I don't know, Boing Boing would never link to a college football thing, but okay, let's say we're both writing about Google, right? You've written a post about Google, I've written a post about Google, and you happen to get an incoming link from Boing Boing and the Washington Post, and I'm getting incoming links from my sister, who is a fine person, but not a very prominent blogger. You're going to be much
Google rank, you know?
Yeah, right, exactly. You're going to be much higher ranked than mine. So that's the general principle. It's about those incoming links and the general relative scores of those incoming sources. Now, that's a brilliant insight, and that was the core insight in the academic paper that Google's founders produced when they were still grad students at Stanford, and it became the organizing principle for the web. It said, look, let's look at what matters about the web. The web is webby. It's the links that are the gold standard. I mean, it's the gold of, or the oil of the web. So, brilliant insight. But there's more to it, because we happen to know that there are problems if you rely exclusively on the wisdom and or stupidity of the crowds. There are problems with certain subjects and areas. So, for instance, for a number of years, if you did searches for words like Jew or Holocaust, you would find anti-Semitic sites and Holocaust denial sites showing up very high in the rankings, often dominating the first page. And that was a big problem. And that was explainable because people who make links are not the same people as like the general population, right? People who make links have to be motivated to make links. It's not everybody, right? Most web users never create a URL in their lives, never create a web link in their lives. So what you were getting were results that were skewed by highly motivated groups. So people who deny the Holocaust.
I remember a couple years ago taking part in a Google bomb effort to correct this. You put like a hidden text of Jew somewhere on your blog and link it to like the Wikipedia page for Judaism.
Exactly.
And that seems to have worked.
It has worked, but there's reason to believe that Google alters its algorithm or supplements its algorithm in ways to sort of correct for some obvious problems. And they're, again, not very transparent about when they do this, but this is one of those cases when they almost certainly took action. And, that's why results change often. You do a search, in June 2007, and you might get a very different set of results in June 2008. And it's not that the web itself moved so much. It's that Google's engineers and their quality control people saw a problem, and they tweaked the system a little bit to correct for that problem. They correct, for instance, if they figure out that somebody has been cheating to drive artificial links to his shoe store site, Google is actually going to punish that person and not assume that the web itself is a neutral and open space, but understanding that it has complicated search bots that sort of sense when people are cheating in that way. But think about Holocaust deniers tend to have a lot of time on their hands, right? They don't have real jobs. They don't have friends. They rarely have dates. So they're going to sit around all the time. Yeah, right. They're going to sit around all the time making websites about Holocaust denial and, of course, linking to each other because it's a very small group of highly motivated people who want to cite each other as evidence for denying the Holocaust. That's the perfect situation for a corrupt Google search result. because all those people are going to score high, and every once in a while one breaks through to get attention, right? Every once in a while somebody says, aha, this guy is a Holocaust denier, here's a link to his site to see how bad it is, and that of course just facilitates that. So understanding that...
How is this different from, like, if I Google, as I just did right now,
yeah,
I Googled Barack Obama.
Right.
And what I get, of course, is Barack Obama's website. That's not going to be the most reliable source of information about Barack Obama, is it?
Exactly. Exactly, and that's so that's one thing we have to keep in mind, right? What it is the most popular source of information about Barack Obama. If you actually are curious about who you should vote for in November, then you need to click down a few, or you should probably not even do a Google search for Barack Obama, because you're just going to find...
Yeah, well, you get down a couple, you get Barack Obama's Wikipedia page. Yeah. That's the next thing after... And the Wikipedia page is going to be pretty good, I imagine.
Yeah, and here's what's interesting about that. About a year and a half ago, Wikipedia entries started showing up in the first page of almost every generic search that I was doing. Yeah. And it happened in a very short period of time. And one of the things that I've been trying to figure out, and I've not been able to get a good answer out of this, is did that happen because Google decided that it would be healthy to bring Wikipedia into the conversation at that level and tweak the algorithm? Or did it happen because at that moment Wikipedia's reputation reached critical mass among web users? I know that I and a lot of other people, as they would blog, if you wrote about a particular figure or phenomenon, would often link to the Wikipedia entry because it was convenient, open, free, and generally dependable. A good place for people to say, oh, what are you talking about when you talk about something technical? And so I've been trying to figure out, and I don't have a clear answer yet, on when and why and how...
I think it just has to do with the relevance of the... so looking at it right now, Wikipedia's page rank is 9, which is as high as anybody gets. And then a page that's titled Barack Obama, that's all about Barack Obama, should hit the sweet spot of the algorithm, right? So if you've got a page rank of 9 and you've got a page that says the guy's name over and over and over again, but I don't know. Maybe they were bumping them up. Well, then what explains why Google? And I think you blogged about this recently. They just opened their own. I didn't even know about this until I read it on your blog. They opened their own sort of like open source encyclopedia,
right?
What was it called?
Knoll, like KNOL. Yeah, like knowledge.
Like knowledge.
The first few letters of knowledge. I don't know. Google. One thing. Google does a lot of things really brilliantly. Branding is about.
Why have they done this?
Well, branding. They're really bad at branding. They come up with dumb names for a lot of their things. But okay, so why have they done this? Well, it's an experiment. A lot of what Google does is an effort to just see if something works, see if something actually takes off, right? Actually, Gmail was just an experiment. It happened to take off really fast because people really dug the interface. But sometimes they roll something out just to play and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So one thing is Google recognized that people had some legitimate concerns about Wikipedia, one being that real experts in the field don't always get to have their say in Wikipedia. In other words, having a diploma or a vita doesn't give you instant cultural capital in the Wikipedia community. Not that there's anything wrong with that, So there were a lot of moments in sort of the discussion about Wikipedia in which Google saw that there might be an opening for a more authoritative, user-generated knowledge database, right? Something like Ask.com, sort of like Wikipedia, but has its own flavor and was built into the Google universe. Because, look, one of Google's goals is to keep you on Google pages as much as possible. Knowing that its chief function is to send you elsewhere, they also want to give you a reason to stay home. And so they thought, well, look, if we build this thing and enough really high-level experts volunteer their time to build up these entries, then we could actually establish some value. And again, not pay anyone to do it. But it could distinguish itself from Wikipedia. So, if it fails, I don't think Google's sweating it that much. It's just server space and a little bit of basic code. It's not like they've invested billions in it. They never bought an ad for it, right? They rely on people like me to tell the world about it. One thing I've noticed, though,
yeah, thanks.
In the last couple weeks is that null entries have started showing up on the first page of some searches. So clearly they did tweak the algorithm to push null up, because people don't really know about null yet, and yet it's already showing up pretty high in some web searches. So,
do you have a null page? Do you have a Wikipedia page?
I do have a Wikipedia page about myself, right? And of course, part of the Wikipedia protocols are that I'm not allowed to edit my own page, which is kind of funny. So anytime I see an error in it, which is very rare, I've only seen a handful of things, or anytime a couple weeks ago, I suddenly realized that having my actual date of birth in my Wikipedia page and having so many identifiable points about my biography available meant that it would be really easy to steal my identity, and you start using credit cards in my name. And now that I've married someone with good credit, that actually is a real risk. So I thought I would like to remove my month and date of birth and leave my year, but I couldn't do it myself because the Wikipedia editors would immediately stamp down on it and fix it again. So I had to write to a friend and say, "Would you take out my date of birth from there?" So
well, you can do it yourself. I mean, you don't have to log in.
Right, you can do it anonymously.
I've edited my own Wikipedia page, like when there was just like a factual inaccuracy, because this thing depends on trust too. Like I'm not about to edit. It just seems gross, right? To like actually say anything about yourself in your Wikipedia page. That's not supposed to be the point. But there was something that was just wrong in it. And
but but in my case, and it's not true for everybody. In my case, there's one particular editor who has me on a watch list, and whenever anyone changes anything, there's a bit of a fight about it for some reason. I don't know why, and I don't even know who this guy is or why he cares about me at all. But and it hasn't really been a problem. It's not like the guy defends inaccuracies or whatever. But there was a little bit of a discussion about something that I wrote some time ago and how it would be described on my page. And so I know that anytime someone makes a change to my page, this guy reviews it and often rejects it. So I would rather not post anything anonymously and do it myself. Plus, it would violate the spirit of the page. The page came up because somebody else wrote it. I didn't write it, and I just figure I'll let other people do it. And I'll make a request of someone.
If you need any work done on your Wikipedia page, Steve, just let me know.
All right. And I'll do yours. I'm happy to.
Yeah,
I'm happy to.
Well, I had a notability challenge recently, which annoyed me. My page was proposed for deletion for my lack of notability.
Ooh.
I know, that cuts. That's the worst, like sort of like internet diss. It's like
right. Well, and it doesn't speak well. It doesn't speak well of either Cato or blogging heads. If you're getting getting suspected,
I guess not. People came to my rescue, which I was grateful for. But
did you start a campaign? Did you blog about that and tell your friends like, "Hey, I'm in trouble here"? Because that's a really interesting phenomenon. Wow.
So because what happens is I think people will Google your name,
right,
and your Wikipedia page comes up, and what I'm guessing happened because the final edits were somebody had logged in and said that they hadn't edited it before, but they watched me on Blogging Heads or something like that, and thought it was silly that I wasn't notable enough, and so added a bunch of information about me to like meet the notability challenge, but then it ended up sounding like a press release.
Yeah, right.
Like about how like great Will Wilkinson is, but it was like in this response to. So I mean that's I don't know how we got talking about Wikipedia, but like these notability challenges seem to have the side effect of like people having to prove that the person who has it, and there was this great piece by Nicholson Baker in the New York Review of Books a couple months ago about where he was deriding the sort of fascistic editors who want to delete everything. Like, what skin is it off my back? I mean, like, if my grandmother has a Wikipedia page, like, what does it matter? I mean, it's really kind of strange. Like,
that's
so. I'm glad that I finally passed the Wikipedia test or the notability test after having had an entry for like 2 years. But just the idea of these guys roaming around Wikipedia looking for entries to delete. There might be somebody who's interested in this obscure person.
Right. Well, so that raises a lot of interesting questions. I mean, is there value in limiting what you might think of as pollution or Wikipedia spam? I mean, people do start Wikipedia pages about their companies or about their pet projects,
absolutely.
and so first of all, it is expensive for them to host every page. So if 10 million people started, pages about themselves or their dogs, that would actually cost the Wikipedia Foundation some money. So there is reason to comb through it, and there's reason for the sake of maintaining the reputation of the service to make sure that you don't have sock puppets or spam going on there. But then the question is, does it go overboard? Clearly, in your case, it goes overboard. But maybe it ended up being a healthy conversation. It ended well. You stayed alive.
Well, now I want to re-edit my page though because it really does. Like, it embarrasses me because I want it to just be more simple. Other than I don't need it to say these things that sort of Will's more important than you think he is, right? So, but I feel like bound by the rules of Wikipedia not to.
Yeah.
Because if I was going to edit my entry, it would be to make it more sort of just tighten it up, make it more modest, and it's a strange dynamic. But we should get back to Google because we don't have that much.
Yeah. So here's a good bridge.
You were telling me just before we started that there was this big net neutrality case that involves Google.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about that.
So Google, one of the keys to Google's success is Google recognizes that on a level open playing field, it's almost always going to win. It's almost always going to win because it's a thin veneer of a company, right? It's a company that has a tremendous amount of trust built up among the general public. It's a company that doesn't directly tax us, insult us, or threaten us. So, all things being equal, Google's in a really strong competitive position. So Google sees two threats to its dominance. One in the politics and policies of internet service providers, of the big telecoms that run the last mile of pipe to our houses in high-speed internet. So Time Warner, Comcast, AT&T, Verizon. Those are Google's strongest challengers in the sense of how the web will work or how the internet will work in the future. These companies want desperately to be able to regulate the flow of data on the internet. They want to be able to filter or guide what we experience. They want to be able to privilege some sites over others and essentially extort money. They want to be able to say, you know what, CNN.com is costing us a lot of bandwidth because people keep going there and looking at video, and video is a lot of bandwidth. We would like to charge CNN a premium to make sure that its content gets to our customers. That's essentially extortion, right?
I don't see the analogy. How's that extortion? I mean,
because right now CNN's bits and YouTube's bits are competing equally for our attention, right? They both flow to us at the same rate in a neutral internet. But by saying, you know what, we're going to hold you up, right? It's like saying to a shopkeeper, your deliveries aren't going to come if you don't pay us a little bit of grease, right? Which is essentially what the mob says to a small shopkeeper. The Teamsters aren't going to come through for you, and stuff's going to get lost on the loading dock if you don't pay protection. That's essentially what telecom companies have been saying.
Because this doesn't strike me. So suppose I have, I have a package that I want delivered.
Yeah.
And I'm going through UPS.
Right.
And my package is small. They charge me less to deliver it. And my package is very, very large. They'll charge me a lot. And that kind of analogy seems to make sense to me. So because they have finite bandwidth,
Exactly.
And
but that model,
this.
right? That model. No. Listen, that model makes sense if you're talking about comparing one package you're trying to send versus another package you're trying to send. But if you and I are competing for business, and UPS starts systematically promising to deliver your packages faster than my packages if you pay them more, basically promising to discriminate, that's a problem.
They do that. You can pay them more and they'll promise to get it there faster.
That's true, but it doesn't cost me, and in other words, it doesn't slow me down. But in bandwidth, because there is a zero-sum of bandwidth, it would slow me down. It would degrade my service, right? UPS doesn't degrade my service because you're going faster, right? And so, that's the problem with neutrality, with network regulation, is that they would actually be dialing you up and dialing me down. So this becomes a big problem in two areas. So there's the CNN versus YouTube problem, which is one issue, and that actually has implications for free speech and all sorts of other things that I don't think are really that important. But consider Skype or any of the internet IP telephony services, right? Skype is a big threat to Time Warner and Verizon, both of which are internet companies which would rather you use their service to call England or Manila than use Skype. So Skype is a big problem for them. They have a very strong interest in dialing down the service from Skype, in making sure that Skype's packets don't flow very well, because that could frustrate Skype users. They could easily frustrate AIM users who are using instant messaging to communicate rather than telephones, and thus drive customers to their own service. There's nothing in the law that before a few days ago, actually, that prevented them from doing this sort of anti-competitive behavior. Now, remember, we're not just talking about a service. Now, you can pay more to get more, and everybody does that, both on the consumer end and the production end.
Yeah.
It's a matter of whether you're discriminating one service versus another. So Time Warner Cable could very easily decide that it wants Fox News's flow to be impeded because it wants to drive customers to CNN.com, which is, of course, a Time Warner company. There are all sorts of ways that disrupting network neutrality is dangerous and hazardous and expensive. And what we'd rather see.
So you don't mind if there's a general, because from my perspective, if Comcast has invested N millions of dollars building a certain kind of infrastructure, then others are using it. They have the discretion to decide how the users of the infrastructure pay. I agree with you.
Right. That's one way of expressing it, that others are using it. But think about it in the Google sense, right? It's not just that others are using it. It's that they are providing. It's the endpoint companies that are actually providing the stuff that people want, right? They're providing and paying money as a result. I mean, you pay to upload stuff from your server to the internet. You're paying these companies up front anyway, right? So it's not like they're doing it for free. But let's remember that if it weren't for YouTube, if it weren't for BitTorrent, if it weren't for CNN.com, no one would have a reason to subscribe to DSL or get a cable modem. We'd be perfectly happy dialing in at 5400 speed to get our email. That worked just fine. So it's not like, the corporate line from these companies is, we invest all this in infrastructure and other people are free riding on our service. No, it's that they invest all this in infrastructure so that they could free ride on the content that other companies are either providing or hosting. So there's free riding going on both sides if you want to play the free riding card. But I think it's a pretty thin argument on both sides. The real question is, what's best for the future of the Internet? Is it better to have a situation like in Japan or in most of Europe where broadband works at a much higher rate and there is a general principle of neutrality because the state ensures that certain rules are followed? And that's essentially what we're getting toward now. Now that the FCC has told Comcast that it cannot discriminate against BitTorrent, It's making sure that it's challenging Comcast to come up with other bandwidth-shaping technologies that don't discriminate.
But I want Comcast to discriminate. So I live in a college town, right? And I'm on the same line as like all these kids who are just like uploading and downloading stolen music and porn videos, and they're making my internet service extremely slow.
Yeah. So the solution is actually to increase the total speed. I mean, the increase is the idea is to actually upgrade.
So if Comcast decides to throttle down uploads to BitTorrent, so that the rest of their customers who aren't doing that can have the service that they're paying for,
right?
That doesn't strike me as unreasonable.
Oh, it does if you think about the fact that it's discriminating against a certain content provider or source and discriminating one type of content over another. The better way to do it is actually what Comcast is now going to do, which is at moments of very high traffic, it's going to equally dial down speed and alert people about that. Basically, all of these companies have been holding back on increasing our total speed in hopes of being able to install these sorts of discriminating and filtering technologies in their system, which they haven't all done yet.
Do you understand why there's not a more granular pricing policy that has to do with the amount of bandwidth you use? Why doesn't that happen? Because it would be very easy to measure.
Exactly. That would be great. We should have metered internet service, right? The kid who's using BitTorrent should pay $100 a month for his service, where if you're just reading stuff on the web and doing email, you should be paying $20 a month. You're absolutely right. There's no technological reason they can't do that. It's just administratively maybe expensive. I mean, maybe it's a little bit more expensive than they would like it to be, I mean, in other words, it's cheaper for them to put a filter or create a more structured, tiered price structure on the inputs, and thus manipulate the system that way than it is to actually meter our service. I think metered service is a great idea, and I think it's a responsible idea. It would be wonderful.
More probably because I'm pretty sure that I get subsidized by less active users.
We're actually being subsidized right now. We're about to upload huge video files, to a server far away, and so for about 30 minutes or however long it takes to upload, we're going to be chewing up a lot of our neighborhood's bandwidth, and we're power users, and we should pay more for that.
Yeah, and I would be happy to. Rather than that, the thing is, I would be happy to pay more to ensure that because I've had Comcast and it's noticeable. Like when you upload a large file, you see the rate, right? You see the rate at which it's uploading, and then a minute or so into that, you see that just go. Right. You can see it being throttled, the speed of your upload being throttled back. And I would like to pay to be able to get the full speed for my uploads. But I can't. You know what, Siva? Believe it or not, our time is up. I haven't been doing Blogging Heads for the last couple of weeks since I've been moving, and so maybe I'm losing my sense of time. But we've talked an hour. So I think what and we didn't talk about nearly enough stuff about Google, but I recommend everybody go to Siva's website, The Googlization of Everything. You can see the book being written in real time. When's the book going to come out? You sold a contract for it.
Yeah, I'm just going to submit the manuscript in December, and the book will be out in August of 2009 from the University of California Press here in North America, and from a company called Profile in the UK and the Commonwealth. So I'm very excited about it. This time next year, I'll be on tour, hopefully coming to a college town near you, or doing a whole bunch of other web-based publicity things about a year from now. Hopefully Google will still be around. I mean, the stock price has been falling, but no, I'm sure it'll be around for many years. So yeah, it's been a blast, and let's do this again some other time. We can talk more about communication policy, the FCC. We have a lot of other issues we can talk through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We'll do it again. And what I'm going to do now is look up Mark Twain. What is man?
All right, great.
So
thanks for that.
and get off the internet for a second.
All right.
You know, back to the 19th century. Thanks a lot, Siva.
Sure, anytime. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.